planning to fire Mueller. With me now is Congressman Ted Lieu, Democrat from California, who we have here in New York City, which is nice, and Betsy Woodruff, reporter for the Daily Beast, who wrote that piece on Tillis. And Betsy, let me start with you. What is the rationale of Tillis's office that they no longer seem to back their own legislation?
They gave me two reasons as to why they aren't actively trying to move this legislation forward. And to be clear, Tillis's office's statement says they support the idea of ultimately making this legislation law. However, they don't think it's urgent, and they aren't currently engaged in efforts to move the ball forward. The two reasons they gave me for that are, first, they say that they trust that President Trump isn't going to fire Mueller. And second, and this is really important, Tillis's spokesperson said he didn't think there was currently enough support in Congress to get legislation like this passed. I'll leave it to viewers to assess which they think is more likely, whether Trump would fire Mueller or this kind of bill would get through Congress. But that's the explanation that Team Tillis is giving for why they've essentially put their efforts to move this forward on ice.
Congressman, Senator Tillis was interesting because Senator Graham is someone I think who has a reputation of sort of working on bipartisan legislation very sort of showily sometimes, whereas Tillis is more of a sort of party line person. That's in the Senate. So in the House, you have some legislation, I think, to protect Mueller. Am I right?
Yes, I'm a co-author of legislation that would transfer the authority to remove the special counsel to a panel of 3 judges. So far, it's only Democrats supporting it. We don't have any courageous Republicans in the House.
Are there any Republicans signed on to any legislation to protect Mueller in the House?
No. But I do think it's important.
Zero.
Zero. But I think what's more important than the legislation is public opinion. And I think President Lincoln had it right when he said public sentiment is everything. With it, nothing can fail. Without it, nothing can succeed. And public opinion is overwhelmingly in favor of letting Robert Mueller complete his investigation. And if Trump got him removed, people would take to the streets.
Is your understanding that the reason that McGahn sort of threw himself in front of this, at least according to the reporting, has to do with that? Like, do you think ultimately that's the check that has bound it so far?
I think McGahn saw what happened in Watergate, and he wasn't going to be a part of that. Keep in mind, John Dean went to prison because he was involved in the cover-up, the obstruction of justice. McGahn didn't want to be a part of that. He certainly puts himself in jeopardy. And keep in mind, not only would McGahn have resigned, Deputy Attorney General Rosenstein would have had to resign as well because he wasn't going to fire Mueller. Then they would have put in Associate Attorney General Rachel Brand, who is an upstanding person. She would not have fired Mueller. So Trump would have had to get a lot of people fired.
You think it actually would have gone through the entire thing?
Absolutely. It would be like the Saturday Night Massacre 2.0 squared.
You know, Betsy, one thing that struck out, has jumped out from the McGahn story here in terms of ways of sort of binding this situation is McGahn's threat to quit. And it seems like that's something that people have used quite effectively with the president. Don McGahn threatening to quit, Christopher Wray apparently threatening to quit over the pressure to fire Andrew McCabe. Do you think that's something that is a tool in the toolkit for those who are seeking to stop the president from doing something like firing Mueller?
It's a good question. And to be clear, senior level officials in the federal government basically always have some sort of resignation letter on hand in case they reach a situation that is so fraught and so frustrating that they feel they need to break out that threat. So it's certainly not unique to this administration. This is something we see folks in the executive branch always sort of keeping on hand as a way to push back against presidents that they believe are overstepping their bounds. That said, of course, the number of public reports indicating that senior level officials have sort of used this tactic to try to push back against the president is clearly significant. Another thing that I think is important to bear in mind when we talk about pushback against the president is one figure who's flown a bit under the radar, and that is Ty Cobb. In terms of the timeline, when Trump reportedly threatened to fire Mueller, that came in June. Shortly after that, Ty Cobb stepped on, and in the time that he's been the president's top in-house lawyer, we've seen almost a complete 180 as far as how the White House the Mueller probe. I think that's very much due to him. He's been an under-the-radar figure who's actually quietly, I believe, shown a lot of influence.
Do you trust, though, that lawyer can restrain his client, who's the president of the United States?
I think the larger...
I don't. And you bring up a interesting point. Why are so many people threatening to resign? Because there's a pattern of obstruction of justice. Donald Trump tried to get Michael Flynn's investigation dropped. He then fired the FBI director. He then tried to fire the deputy FBI director. And then he tried to get his own attorney general to resign. And now we know he tried to get Robert Mueller fired. This is a pattern, and even a mediocre prosecutor would be able to prosecute this case.
Do you have a sense that this is coming to a head anytime soon? Do you have any sense in Congress that that's the case?
I have a sense that the special counsel's investigation is going to come to a head when they interview President Trump. Trump lied over 2,000 times, according to Washington Post last year. And then he's going to go into an interview with FBI agents where if you lie once, it's perjury.
All right, Betsy Woodruff and Congressman Ted Lieu, thank you both for joining us.